Oftentimes when you're hunting, you have to be quick. Taking time to range, dial, and wait for that animal to get into position can cost seconds. What I'm going to show you today is how to calculate the maximum point blank range of your rifle and caliber. The reason we're going to do this is so we can maximize our effectiveness at the greatest range. I'm going to show you how to do this using your rifle, your caliber, factory ammunition, a computer, and a fixed reticle variable power scope. This system's quick and easy. If you're new to hunting or have been hunting for a while and would like some more of this information, go ahead and like and subscribe so you can get notified whenever more videos come out. I'm putting them out as often as possible, but it's not often possible for me to get these out. You can also check out my social media at Instagram and Facebook, and a website at the following links in the lower left-hand corner, I hope. All right, let's get into it. Here are some of the things that are involved in a hunt. In order to evaluate these further, I'm going to make some assumptions. Basically, items we're not going to talk very much about. And the first one would be the shooter. I'm going to assume that that shooter can practice good shooting fundamentals and be accurate. I'm also going to assume that the rifle is capable of being precise. In particular, for this instance, being at least 1.5 MOA in precision. And the last assumption I'm going to make is that this shot needs to happen quickly. So that leaves the three other items to evaluate: the deer, the cartridge, and the distance to that animal we want to kill. Let's first evaluate the animals that we're going to hunt. What I'm about to talk about isn't exactly pleasant, but it's truthful and it's good to speak this way. All living things have a fire that burns inside of them. That fire is produced by a spark and fuel. In this example, particularly, the spark is provided by the nervous system, the brain, and the spinal column. The fuel is provided by oxygen, carried by the lungs and the heart. In order to kill this animal, we have to stop one of those systems. For this example, we are not going to talk about the brain and the spinal column. We're not going to talk about removing the spark. The brain is too small and the spinal cord too thin. We're going to eliminate what's known as the vitals, the heart and lung. And each animal has a vital area or a vital housing that's a particular size. We're going to concentrate on those and look at those further. The most widely hunted animal in North America is the whitetail. Do you know how tall a whitetail is at the shoulders? I know this answer, but I'm always surprised because they always look bigger to me in the woods. But the average whitetail stands 33 inches at the shoulder. Another common big game animal that's hunted in North America that's often missized is the black bear. A black bear, on average, actually stands shorter than a whitetail, about 30 inches. And then one of the largest and most popular big game animals today is the elk. This is an example of a Rocky Mountain elk, but an elk stands 57 inches at the shoulder. The reason I'm bringing these examples up and talking about their size is because I need to know, in relation to their size, where I need to place my bullets. So a deer effectively has a vital size of 8 inches. A black bear has roughly the same vital size in height, but it extends a little larger and longer in the body cavity. And then an elk's vitals, its heart and lung, lie in a region of about 14 inches. These are generalizations, but they are fairly accurate. Okay, so we've evaluated We've talked about what's required and the target size created by the characteristics of the animals. Now we're going to talk about the characteristics of the cartridge. The bullet flight is determined by several characteristics. The first would be its launch velocity or its initial velocity provided by that powder in that cartridge. The next is actually determined by the bullet's mass, and then the bullet's ability to resist air, better said, would be its characteristics versus air resistance. There's a numerical value given to this characteristic, and that's called a ballistics coefficient. In order to know how this bullet glides through the air, we're going to start to consider its ballistics coefficient, or its BC. The recipe of a cartridge, what you see on the left, is created by many manufacturers, and the ingredients in that recipe, the bullet, the powder, the primer, and even the casing, determine flight characteristics or gliding characteristics of that bullet. We're trying to figure out what the maximum range is we can engage this animal. Let's go back and look at that diagram of the hunter, the rifle, and a deer. Remember, we talked about a kill zone size. For a deer, we said it is 8 inches. As long as that hunter shoots around anywhere in that 8-inch window, he's going to hit the vitals of that deer. We're going to hedge our bets to be more effective by reducing our tolerance. Instead of shooting at an 8-inch target, we're going to shoot into a 6-inch target or a 6-inch corridor. The other thing that's ignored in that initial diagram was the actual trajectory of a bullet. As soon as that bullet leaves the muzzle, it is 1.5 inches low of the line of sight, and because of gravity, it will just continue to fall. We have to compensate for this. We do that by elevating the rifle. If you look at the new lines, we have a line of sight, the blue one, and a black line, the trajectory of the bullet. There are 2 positions where those lines intersect. Basically, there is 0 difference, close, and one that occurs far, or near and far. If we held a target at that point and we shot our rifle, we would hit the white center of those targets. If we were speaking French, we would call that point blanc. If we were speaking English, we call that point blank. And what we're trying to do is maximize our distance for that far zero, or our maximum point blank. But if you look at this trajectory in relation to the 6-inch green corridor, there's a problem. It starts to occur here. It's out of the kill zone almost the whole way to the target animal. We have to take that trajectory and get it down into the 6-inch range. And we're going to do that by shifting the positions of 0 on those lines. We still have a near and far 0, but now those near and far zeros are within that 6-inch corridor. And so we've just adjusted our 0 distance to maximize the bullet distance that stays in the kill zone. That's the concept of maximum point blank range. A deer has an 8-inch kill zone, but we've reduced it to 6 inches in order to basically allow some fudge or some error on our part. An elk has an actual kill zone of 14 inches, but we're going to consider its kill zone as 12 inches. All right, now we're going to go and evaluate maximum point blank range of different cartridges. The first thing to do, gather the cartridges. Then I write a list of different characteristics that I want to note of each cartridge and start to research. A lot of the information you can find on a box. For example, here the muzzle velocity. Manufacturers are often optimistic, so I take 100 feet per second off of their listed velocity. The next thing I got to do is get on their websites and research the ballistics coefficient of each of their rounds. Finally, I'm able to create a list similar to this. The next thing I do is go online to shooterscalculator.com. On there, they have a calculation for maximum point blank range. In that window, you enter in your G1 ballistics coefficient and your initial velocity, which we recorded on our 3x5 card. And then you'll calculate your point blank range. That'll end up pulling up a chart for a near zero, far zero, minimum, maximum point blank range, and 0 at 100. I usually just take a screenshot of those or write that information down for the next step. In the next step, we're going to actually calculate our ballistic trajectory. This will tell us where a bullet is sitting versus our line of sight throughout its whole path. I go ahead and enter in my ballistics coefficient, my bullet weight, its initial velocity, and its 0 range. The 0 range I get off of that information from max point blank range. So I go to look at my card and my information, and I think we were at 226 yards. 217 yards for this round and bullet. I reduced the chart range to 400. You'll see why here shortly. And then I also eliminate some of the information on these charts that are produced. The beauty of this system is I don't need to know minutes of angles or mils once I've established my limits of range. So I get rid of those. And it produces this chart. I take a screenshot of it. I'm going to fast forward through a few other examples and then we'll evaluate them here shortly. Okay, so that example showed us how we calculate our maximum point blank range using our velocity and the bullet's ballistics coefficient. What I want to do now is highlight some of that information. All right, so the first bullet we're going to look at through that 30-06 is the 165 grain Federal Fusion. I like this bullet because of its ballistics coefficient. It's a lead core bullet that performs close and far fairly well, actually very well. But in particular, when we were calculating max point blank range, we have our far zero is going to be 226 yards. The max distance we can shoot is 266 yards. In order to do that, if I zero at 100 yards, I need to be 2.8, I round to the nearest tenth, 2.8 inches high. This all needs to be confirmed, but if I had to zero quickly in the field, I could shoot at 24 yards and zero my rifle a shorter distance. All right, so what does that mean? Most people, they want to shoot out beyond 300. Again, if you're in the east or you're hunting timber, you need not worry about that. Your encounters are going to be 150 yards or closer. But some people who are hunting elk want to shoot further. It's often seen that people dial for that, but there is a quicker way of doing it. If we look at 300 yards, that bullet is only shooting 6.5 inches low at 300. If I knew he was out there at 300, I could nudge it up a little bit, meaning nudge my line of sight up a little bit. But what if he was further than 300? What's the max range with this 30-06? If you remember in a few videos ago, we talk about, and it's an estimate, but we talk about 1,500 pounds being energy needed to be delivered by a rifle in order to engage an elk. If we're trying to reduce all the other variables, why push that to its limit? If you look, if I go to the edge of it and beyond, the furthest I can effectively shoot and engage that animal with enough energy is 400 yards. At that point, the bullet is going to drop 22 inches. At that point, I could hold a little bit above the back of an elk and drop my bullet into the kill zone. And at that point, I'm maxed out. I'm not shooting any further. And the reason I'm not going to is because my bullet, even if I did hit the target, my bullet will not perform properly. Either because of velocity. If you look, we're already down to 1,900 feet per second. So it will not perform properly either because of velocity or energy. That's my limit. There's nothing I can do about that other than shooting a different cartridge. I'm not buying another rifle. I know my limitations on my rifle. At that point, on that day, that elk gets to walk. And maybe he walks into another hunter and that hunter gets a good day. Or I see him another day where he's closer and I get to observe him and watch him a little longer to where I get to learn more about elk behavior. All right, here's the characteristics of my 180 grain Nosler partitions. The 150 grain bullets, and these are Remington core locks. Okay, just to review our maximum point blank range, we end up getting a near zero and a far zero. In this example here, I'm going to pick my favorite bullet that I've evaluated so far, and that is that Federal Fusion. And this is for deer. I don't know that I would use it for elk, but it's coming out of the barrel at 2,690 feet per second. It's got a BC of .454. We are still going to consider the 6-inch target, and I'll talk about why at the end of this video. Our maximum point blank range is 266 yards away. If that deer was 266 yards away, in this diagram, that hunter would kill, if he was accurate, that hunter would kill that deer. Pull up, aim in the center of the vitals, you'll hit low in the vitals. No adjustment to a reticle or a turret needed. Pull up, see, shoot. It's a 3-second event if you've got a good rest. All right. At 226 yards, that round is going to land right at point blank. Line of sight and bullet will line up to be the same. Aim center mass, bullet drops right into the kill zone. Let's say that deer was actually 24 yards away. The hunter could pull up, aim at center mass or where he wanted to hit. Actually, at 24 yards, that bullet will impact right at his line of sight. Every distance in between there, pull up, get your sight picture, center mass of the vitals. As long as he's within 0 and 266 yards, shoot, and you'll probably get your deer. If I increase that target size to 12 inches, I now can shoot out to 296 yards for a 0, which makes my bullet effective out to 350 yards. The problem that gets introduced is mid-range. If you look here, I'm 4.8, almost 6 inches high at 150. It's too much variation for an 8-inch target. Last thing I want to talk about, I believe this is the last thing, I hope it is, is how to mitigate poor minute of angle, or how to mitigate poor accuracy either in the shooter or the rifle. Some of you may have a rifle that you love to carry because it's not heavy, and you're going to carry the rifle more than you will shoot it during hunting. Or you have a relative's rifle that may not have the minute of angle accuracy, the minute of angle precision that you want. We'll talk about how to mitigate it and why you need to mitigate it and why you need to be honest with yourself on a bench versus field positions. Okay. We're going to look at this target, and the first thing we're going to do, again, instead of those 8-inch vitals, we're going to reduce that to 6 inches. The next thing we're going to do is set up an example. I'm going to show a circle at 100, and that circle represents a 2-minute angle in relation to the vital zone you see placed on that deer. One at 200 and one at 300. Let's take this grouping and place it on our deer. As you look at this, look at which grouping or what distance you would actually be safe or unsafe at taking a shot at this deer if you were on the outer edge limit of the vitals. I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's up to you. When you have a rifle that has a larger minute of angle or a larger inaccuracy or imprecision, you need to go through, calculate your maximum point blank range and reduce the target size from 6 inches down to 4, or maybe even reduce your maximum range that you're willing to shoot at an animal, knowing that you may wound it. And listen, there's nothing wrong with knowing your limitations and adjusting to them. And there's nothing wrong with knowing your weapon's limitations and staying within their limitations. All right. Hopefully from that video you learned that maximum point blank range can be pretty effective. It has its limitations, but man, it is simpler than doing all the other things, and it's less expensive. The system works. You just have to work within your limits. It's not so bad, right? Just learn how to get closer to game. The way you're going to do that is by being in the field more often. Not only just shooting your rifle more often, not only doing the simple things or the things that are easy to do, you're going to have to do the hard stuff, which is create some time to get out in the woods and get closer to animals. Basically, get out there and explore your nature. Good luck, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.